Hello and welcome to a new episode of One Chord a Week. As always, this is Andre, and today's chord is maybe the last of the fundamental chords we have studied, because I think we've covered all the triads and all the seventh chords except for this one. And this one is the last of the diatonic chords. You'll need it to harmonize major scales, minor scales, the modes, and so on. And it's also a very nice sounding chord and rich in possibilities. So let's begin. The minor 7 flat 5 chord, also referred to as the half-diminished chord, is a key chord because it comes from the harmonization of the major scale, specifically on the 7th degree. So that means that if we are, for example, in C major, this chord will be found on the B, which is the last note, the 7th note of the scale. So in the key of C, the B chord would be minor 7 flat 5 if you harmonize it in 7th. It, of course, derives from the diminished triad, but whereas the diminished triad, as we looked at before, here's a link, you'll see that it's very dissonant and hard to manage. This chord, because it adds an extra note, it's a bit rounder, and we're going to look at that in the sound section. Also, it's very common in many styles of music, just because of the fact that it's a diatonic chord, but specifically in jazz, and we're going to look at an application later. And you'll find it in pop music, in rock sometimes, you can find it, of course, in classical music soundtracks, you know, a lot of stuff. And funk music, you'll find it pretty much anywhere. And it certainly is a must-know chord. So let's see how it's built, and then we'll get into the sound, the shapes, and all the good stuff we always do in these videos. The starting point for the half-diminished chord, or minor 7 flat 5 chord, is, of course, a diminished triad. And as you already know, the diminished triad is really simple to build. It's a sequence of minor thirds. So we have the root in C, E flat as the minor third, and then G flat as the diminished fifth. The diminished fifth, in case you forgot, is the note that you'll find right before the regular fifth or perfect fifth. So in this case, from G down to G flat, 1 fret. Okay, so this is our starting point. But now on top of this, we're going to add a minor 7th. And the minor 7th is the note you find a whole step before the root. Now this, let's open a quick parenthesis here. We're going to get into it in the sound section. But this chord often gets confused with another chord, which is a diminished 7th. It's a totally different chord. And so make sure you remember that the 7th we add here is a minor 7th. 1 whole step before the root. Okay, don't get confused, because otherwise you get into a totally different kind of chord. All right, so we have root, minor third, diminished fifth, and minor 7th, which is in the case of C is a B flat. Okay, and of course this is a bit of a stretch, so I'll show you easier positions later. There it is, the sound of the half-diminished chord. I think it's much rounder than the usual diminished chord. This is the first thing I noticed when I learned this chord the first time. And to me, there's a reason for it, which is the presence of a perfect fifth. As you know, we looked at many chords throughout this series where any kind of rough edge in the chord, even just a minor chord, when you play just a minor third, it's kind of edgy, right? But then adding the fifth kind of rounds it out. It kind of makes it feel like an actual chord, right? And that happens in many chords. But in the case of this one, we are used to the diminished triad that has no perfect fifth. So there is no rounding agent. There's no consonance at all. And that's missing from the chord. But when you add the minor 7th, then you do introduce a fifth interval. Now, of course, it's not going to be where we kind of want it, where we're used to it, which is between the root and the fifth, but it will be present between the 3rd and the 7th. To demonstrate this, let me just do it for you in the key of B, just because B gets rid of all the sharps and flats. In case you are an advanced student, then you'll have no problem doing it in any key, but if you're new, you don't quite handle so well the sharps and flats, let me do it in B. So the B diminished triad is B, D, and F. B is the root, D is the minor third, and F is the diminished fifth. Okay? If I play it in a chord shape, this is the sound. So now I have all these strange intervals. I have the minor third, which is kind of dissonant, and then the diminished fifth, which is a lot more dissonant. And this chord kind of has no redeeming note there to make it more normal or rounder. So when I eventually lower the root to the minor seventh, because we're going to add the minor seventh of the minor seventh flat 5 chord we're looking at today, this B here becomes an A. The minor seventh of B is an A. And see how that affects the sound. You see that? It really rounds it out, mellows it out. And the reason I think is that this A here creates an interval of a fifth with what? With the D, which is the third. Okay? So if I'm in B, my D here, which is my third, creates a fifth with the A. So the perfect fifth sound is introduced into the chord, not where we kind of expect it, which would be between the root and the fifth again, but somewhere else, but it still works. So this original minor diminished triad, when it becomes minor 7 flat 5, sounds a lot rounder and maybe even easier to use and to put into your progressions. So that's the first thing I wanted to share about the sound of the chord. Of course, this is just a personal interpretation of the sound and how I manage when I want to use it. You should come up with your own ideas each of these chords, but this is where I would start to present it. Another thing that's very interesting about this chord is how it really is very similar to a major 7th chord. Sounds strange because they're so far apart one from the other. The major 7th chord is the first chord we looked at in this series, and here's a link if you missed it. But let's check it out. Let's build a very simple major 7th chord shape, like this one. Let's do C major 7. All right? If I take the root of this chord, which is C, and I raise it a half step, this is a half diminished chord. I will give you this position just in a few minutes, so don't worry about it if you don't know it. Major 7th, minor 7 flat 5. Just by moving the root, all the other notes fall into place to form this chord, which is kind of an interesting thing. It has its applications, but they're beyond today's video, of course, but something interesting to look at. As far as using this chord goes, you can use it in any major, minor key or mode because it is part of the harmonization of that scale, all right? So that's pretty basic. There's another thing that is very often found, which is a 2-5-1 in minor. So if you're playing a jazz tune or maybe even just one of your songs, you can create quite a bit of interest by mixing this chord in with the 5 and 1 of a minor progression. So in the case of C, we would have this chord in D. This would be the second chord, C, D. This is the D minor chord, but instead of playing minor, we're going to play it half diminished. Then we'll go to the G7th, which is the dominant, and resolve to C minor. Okay? It's a beautiful progression, not entirely diatonic, but we won't get into the secondary dominants here and all that stuff, but or the harmonic minor, you know, that's beyond the scope of this video. But if you have a progression in minor and you want to go to the 1, you can certainly do half diminished on the 2, 7th on the 5, and minor on the 1. You can also do it to major, which is a different kind of thing. It's borrowed from a mode, but you can use it the same way. You can do half diminished on the 2, which is D. You can go to the dominant again on the 5, which is G, and then resolve to major, right? Okay, so it's really interesting. Again, it's beyond the scope of this video to get into why all this works, but just, you know, take the result with you for your own use and think that you can use the half diminished on the 2, followed by dominant, and then you can go to either minor or you can go to major. Okay, as a cadence, it works very well. And one more thing I would like to talk about regarding this chord, last thing, I promise, is how often it's confused with another chord, which is the diminished 7th chord. They are different chords, and we're going to look at the other one too, but they're different. The diminished 7th chord is a diminished triad with a diminished 7th. It's a symmetrical chord, it's a non-diatonic chord, it has different uses, okay? So make sure that you don't confuse them. This is the diminished 7th, and this is the half diminished. They're very different. So for now, we won't get into the other one. There will be a video on it, but just make sure you don't confuse the minor 7 flat 5 with a diminished 7th, okay? Because name-wise, they're very easy to swap, right? But you don't want to do that, so make sure you use this one as a diatonic chord, and this one is for something else, all right? And we'll discuss it. There are many positions for this chord across the fretboard, and you should explore a lot of them. I'm going to give you 3 of them again, just to give you something in all areas of the neck and kind of in all registers, but I do encourage you to seek out more possibilities, all right? The first one is maybe the most common one, and you play like this. You play 3, which is the root, on the 5th string. Then we play 4 on the 4th. That's our diminished 5th. I love the sound. Then we play the 7th, which is B flat on the 3rd fret of the 3rd string, and then again on the 4th fret we play the minor 3rd, which is E flat. This is a very common shape and it will serve you very well. For the next position, we move up to the 8th fret of the 6th string. As you know, I always like to leave you one of these chords in this region because it's very easy to find and you can always pretty much find any root on the 6th string. Most people do know that string quite well. And we play basically a minor 7th chord and we modify one note only, all right? So it's pretty simple. If you haven't looked at the minor 7th, there you go. And we go like this. We play the 8th fret, which is C on the 6th string. We skip the 5th, as always, and then we do 8th, 8th, which is our minor 7th and minor 3rd. And then on the 2nd string, we play the diminished 5th, which is G flat, on the 7th fret, all right? This is a very practical shape, and as always, if you play with a pick, make sure you mute the 5th string with this finger. And if you play with your fingers, then you just skip that string and you're set to go. And finally, here's a higher register position. We play the 10th fret on the 4th string. This is our C. And then we bar the 11th fret for the remaining 3 strings. Okay, so this gives us the root here, the diminished 5th, the flat 7, and the minor 3rd. Again, very useful chord. You sometimes need maybe a more funky rhythm, or sometimes you're looking for like an ethereal kind of sound. This is your chord. Of course, all these shapes are movable across the fretboard. There's quite a few scales that work with this chord, and it's hard for me to pick one or the other. So I'm going to give you like a very normal one and a stranger one. There are many more, and if you study this chord in detail, you'll find, you know, all kinds of scales, the diminished scales, and all kinds of Locrian scales. But I'm just going to give you 2, all right? The first one has to be the regular Locrian scale, because the Locrian scale is one of the diatonic scales, the modes, and it comes from just simply studying a major scale from the 7th degree. And if you have any questions about this mode, feel free to ask, but also check out this video that we did a while ago about the Locrian mode specifically, all right? But the idea here is that we have a scale that is built basically to mimic the chord. So we have a root, a flat 2nd, which is kind of weird, but then we have the minor 3rd, which belongs to the chord. We have the perfect 4th and the diminished 5th, which is of course a note of the chord. A flat 6, a flat 7, again, part of the chord, and the root. And over the diminished chord, you see how they match perfectly. Right? They're made for each other. So this is my first option. Another scale that I really enjoy using over the diminished or half diminished chord is the same scale, the Locrian, but moving that 2nd note up 1/2 step. It's a mode of the melodic minor scale, and it's very interesting. And it goes like this. So we take the regular Locrian, but the 2nd note, we raise it 1/2 step. Okay, pretty simple stuff, and it sounds like this. Right? And it's very interesting and beautiful. I suggest you do record the loop of this chord and try jamming with the Locrian natural 2 scale. The reason it sounds prettier to me is that that flat second really brings you into Phrygian territory, and to me it sounds a bit confusing when then you get the flat 5. So it's very specifically Locrian, and I use it, but I really enjoy the Locrian natural 2. That's why I showed it to you. But again, there's many scales, but these two will get you started. So this should serve you well as far as the minor 7 flat 5 chord is concerned, and we looked at positions and the scale and you know, how to build it and all the stuff, and some uses for it and so on. Of course, these videos will always be somewhat limited by their design because we can't go into every chord, in every position, in every key. You know, that's kind of the work you should do. But I think when you watch the whole series, right, as we keep moving along, some things that may be missing from this video, you'll find in another video that deals with a similar chord, or a detail you missed in this video is then repeated in another one, and slowly you'll be able to, instead of absorb information that you can't manage or, you know, elaborate on, you start noticing things like, hey, you know, the 9 sounds very different over this chord than over that chord, and why is that, and where do I want to use it, where do I hear this sound in a song but I don't hear it there, and if I'm trying to express this emotion or feeling, this chord would suit it very well but this one wouldn't, you know. And those are things that you will do with practice, but also by being constantly exposed to chords. So my design for this series is so that when you get the whole thing together, you'll be exposed to so many different sounds that it will enrich your composing, but also even just your ear, because when you know chords, you have access to those sounds, not only playing chords, but also when you improvise, or when you play scales, or when it comes time to choose a mode over another. They're all related to chords. So learning chords is actually great for a bunch of stuff, all right? So I hope this serves you well. And if you enjoyed this video, let me please ask you to subscribe, comment, like, hit the bell, all that stuff. We have live streams and we have the regular videos, and I hope that you will find them useful. If you have any chord you want me to look at before any other, please let me know in the comments, but keep in mind that some of these videos are recorded in advance so as to never miss a Tuesday. All right, so I will think of something very cool for next week. In the meantime, good luck with this half diminished chord, and I will see you very soon with a new one. Bye-bye.